In the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful. Warm welcome to my channel. This is Musaddiq Farooq, Assistant Professor of English in Higher Education Department, Government of the Punjab. As you know, I have started this lecture series in order to help you prepare the test for lectureship that is going to be advertised by Punjab Public Service Commission. And it is also equally helpful for the Federal Public Service Commission lectureship. My previous two lectures deal with Old English literature, that is also called Anglo-Saxon literature. That was compulsory in order to put the whole history of English literature in proper context. Because everything that has evolved and advanced to this age has proper beginning. And most critics and analysts of English literature agree that English literature and English language has its proper beginning in the Anglo-Saxon times. I have brought 45 MCQs from Anglo-Saxon literature before you in my previous two lectures, and after that we are going to move towards Middle English literature. Middle English literature is called Middle English because it was produced in Middle Ages that span from after the conquest in 1066 right up to the beginning of the 16th century. As a student of literature, you must know what happened in the beginning of 16th century in England, in Britain. That is when Renaissance, the effects of a Renaissance started being felt in Britain. That was actually too late in Britain because we know that Renaissance had started affecting literature and minds of the people in Italy long before that, 150 to 200 years before that. Moving to this particular lecture, as usual, I have attached a motivational tag on the front screen. It says, difficult roads often lead to beautiful destinations. Now, difficult in itself is a relative term. Something that is difficult to one person may be very easy and convenient for other person. And if you are quite habitual of reading literature or any other thing, you will not have any difficult time in preparing for lectureship, and you will go through many books before the test is announced. But if you are not habitual of reading, then you will have definitely difficult time making tempo and cadence, making some rhythm in reading. I have advised you in my previous lectures that you must read as much as possible. Reading is input for you, and the more the input, the more the output. You can definitely opt to resort to the books that are purely based on multiple choice questions that do not have any theoretical material for you to read, but my advice is for you that you must go through at least one book before going to multiple choice questions material. And even my lectures are just in the form of tests, you know. If you go to my previous lectures and especially my introductory lecture, the very first lecture of this series, you will find many recommendations about what kind of books you can read about history of English literature. Now, without any further delay, let's proceed in our lecture. In this lecture also, just like my previous lecture, you will have 20 multiple choice questions, and you will have about 30 seconds for each slide. It does not matter whether the slide contains one multiple choice question or two. Even it can contain 3 questions, but for one slide you will have 30 seconds. Yes, this is just to ensure that the material that is present on the slide is almost the same. And here also I again deem it appropriate to remind you that you will have 72 seconds for every question on average for your paper, because there will be 100 multiple choice questions in your paper, and 2 hours 120 minutes for those 100 questions. Some questions will definitely confuse you. I have advised you to just skip them for your first round. And all these things I have already mentioned, and you can go to my previous lectures for all these tips and tricks. And without any delay, let's start. Your time is going to start now.
I never saw it coming. I couldn't read the signs. I don't know why I let you in this time. I must be blind. I guess I couldn't trust you, 'cause all you did was lie. Oh no, I have to keep you off my mind. 'Cause of you, I'm wired up. I don't want you. It's time for you to go. Oh, you, I had enough. I don't want you. It's time for you to go. I never saw it coming. I couldn't read the signs. I don't know why I let you in this time. I must be blind. I guess I couldn't trust you, 'cause all you did was lie. Oh no, I have to keep you off my mind. 'Cause of you, I'm wired up. I don't want you. It's time for you to go. Oh, you, I had enough. I don't want you. It's time for you to go.
Alright, the time is over now, but if you find that the time was less than that which was required for that slide according to you, you can go back to the question, pause the video, and have as much time as possible. You can feel free to do it. And if you like the information that is going to be presented and that has been presented in my previous lectures, please subscribe my channel and hit the bell icon that is present just beside that subscribe button, so that you do not miss any video in future. So in the first question, 1066 Anno Domini marks a significant change in every field of British life. How did it affect the progress of English language? The first option was the Old English was suppressed by French language. English started accepting more influence from French instead of Latin and Germanic language. Charlie option accommodates both alpha and beta options, and delta option is quite opposite to what we have read in the first two options. English became more prominent and was adopted even by the French conquerors. Now in my last lecture I told you in the last question that 1066 was the year when Norman conquest of Britain occurred. So after that period, French became a very important language as far as British society is concerned. All the legal procedures and educational activities were carried out in French language, and of course it was quite natural that English language also started taking influence from French language. As far as the religious activities were concerned, they were definitely carried out in Latin language, and that procedure was little affected, if at all. Now in the light of the statement that I have just given you, it seems that alpha and beta options both are correct. Old English was definitely suppressed by French language, and English started accepting more influence from French instead of Latin and Germanic language. Now the problem is that you cannot fill two circles in any given question, and I have told you what to do in such questions. You will have to search for the option that accommodates both the correct options, and there is certainly an option Charlie that accommodates both of them. So option C is correct, and the rest of them are all incorrect. Although alpha and beta cannot be regarded as incorrect, but in isolation they are incorrect. They can be regarded correct as in combination. The next question was, by the beginning of what English succeeded in ousting French. Ousting means expelling, driving out, getting rid of something. By what year English succeeded in ousting French language and establishing itself, right? Middle English re-established itself to a lot of extent. The first option was the 13th century, 14th century, the 15th century, and the 16th century. The option is of course the 14th century. And why is it so? You must have read the prologue to the Canterbury Tales, and if you are a good avid reader of literature, you even would have read Canterbury Tales in entirety as a whole. So 14th century is correct option. The reason is that it was a year when Chaucer wrote Canterbury Tales, and after that there was a lot of influence of Geoffrey Chaucer, and accepting that influence, that language was used more and more for English literature compositions. Chaucer was born somewhere 1340 and died in 1400 AD. So that was 14th century, of course. Next question says, how did Middle English, the variety of English that re-emerged as the dominant form of communication, differ from Old English of Anglo-Saxon version? The first option says Middle English lost its Anglo-Saxon inflections. It had enriched its vocabulary by taking in many French words. Under the influence of French, Anglo-Saxon alliterative tradition was replaced by rhyming. Delta option is all of these, and E option is none of these. None of the first three, of course, because if all of these is correct, then none of these, of course, is contradictory in itself. Now, in order to understand the question fully, we have to look at what inflection is. Inflectional and derivational morphology. If you remember what you have read in masters, of course, whatever university you belong to, definitely you must have read morphology, study of morphemes, and There is inflectional morphology, derivational morphology. Inflection means if we have a word, for example, verb, go, goes, went, gone, going, all these are inflections. And inflections, the system of inflections was quite different in Anglo-Saxon English, and it changed quite a lot in Middle English. So first option is definitely correct, but the second option is also not wrong. It had enriched its vocabulary by ingesting many French words. Of course, this is also correct. And under the influence of French, Anglo-Saxon alliterative tradition, alliteration I've told you in my lecture number 2, if you look at that, alliteration is the repetition of same sounds in successive words. Tradition was replaced by rhyming, right? The words that have same sounds. Now all these three options are correct. Alpha, beta and Charlie all are correct. So all of these is the correct option here. All of these will be chosen, and all the other options of course will be rejected. Although Alpha, beta and Charlie are correct, but we have discussed that we cannot fill more than one circle in our paper. The next question says, according to some critics, French influence on English language would have been felt even if there had been no Norman conquest in 1066. What is the basis of this judgment? It was the era of French cultural domination of Europe. French rulers painstakingly propagated their literature throughout Europe. England was a next door neighbor of France, and the greatness of French literature of that time was irresistible. Correct option for this question is A. A is correct option. All the other options are incorrect. It was an era of French cultural domination of Europe, and there was no such propaganda as can be implied from beta option. And as far as Charlie option is concerned, England was next door neighbor of France. It was not the reason. The greatness of French literature of that time was irresistible. It might be the case, but the real case was that it was an era of cultural domination of Europe, and without even conquest, there would have been a lot of effect of French language on English language in that era. Fifth question is, English literature after Norman conquest was forcibly relegated to the background, pushed to the background, because of what reason? English literature lost its readership. Amalgamation, combination of French and Latin influences made English more of a mixture than a regular language. Patronage, both courtly and aristocratic, favored French, or none of these. Now in that age, patronage was a very significant factor as far as compositions were concerned, whether it was poetry or prose, whatever it was. Patronage was definitely something that was indispensable, inevitable, unavoidable, and this is the correct option, in which we have some mention of patronage. Option C. All the other options are incorrect, right? Losing readership was not the case, because if there was literature, readers definitely were there, but there was since there was no literature, so there were no readers, and there was no literature because there was nobody to supervise it, there was nobody to sponsor it. Patron means उर्दू में इसको सरप्रस्त बोलते हैं, patronage. So there was no supervision, सरप्रस्ती की कमी थी उस दौर में. As far as beta option is concerned, the influence of French and Latin definitely not have hampered in any way composition of any literature. So this is also not correct option. The next question says, much of Middle English literature was lost soon after its composition. Because of what reason? Most of it was didactic or instructional. Didactic means that is meant to teach you something. It was mostly oral. जुबानी इसको उर्दू में बोलते हैं. Major part of it was addressed to the lower clergy. Clergy means people who are there in the church and who run the administration there. Only translation of other works was done in that era. Now, although didactic literature is quite boring and tedious to read, but this was not the reason that it was lost. Its losing was something that was buried somewhere else. It was mostly oral. Yes, this was the reason actually, because there was no written form, so it was difficult to store it. It was difficult to preserved that form of literature that was not even written in any form. So all the other things are of course incorrect automatically. While alliterative tradition in poetry did linger on, stayed on, it means, for a while in northern and western part of the country, heroic note disappeared completely. Why did it happen? First option says because the New Europe of Middle Ages was a feudal society and not a heroic one. French heroes did not like to be celebrated like Germanic heroes. It seems highly unlikely because nobody hates that publicity, nobody hates to be known and admired. Middle English was not as suitable for the purpose as was Old English, and heroic poetry did not find any patronage. As far as the matter of patronage is concerned, it has been mentioned in the previous question. That was the reason that forced English literature to the background. Actually, the reason was that society in that age was quite different. All other reasons are incorrect. Heroes definitely, whatever and whenever they are, they like to be celebrated, and Middle English was not as suitable. The suitability of the language of course was not the problem at that time, and heroic poetry did not find any patronage. Again, this is not correct. Due to adverse circumstances for its evolution, Middle English split into many dialects. Dialects means regional variations. If you have read sociolinguistics in your master's course, definitely you are quite familiar with this term dialect, regional variations of any language. Which of the following dialect was adopted as literary standard? There is not much to discuss here, so straight away I'm going to tell you the correct option. It was East Midland. All the other options are incorrect. And this was exactly East Midland was a dialect that was spoken around London. The next question says, throughout the late Middle English period, English kings regarded themselves as the rightful kings of France, a claim that produced 100-year war. It is a very famous war between France and England, and the question is, when did this war begin and end respectively? Now the first year that is mentioned in the option is the starting year, and the next that year it is ending year, of course. Most of them are confusing options because in beta there are complete 100 years, and same is the case with in Charlie option, and it might seem to you that one of beta or Charlie option should be correct because they contain complete 100 years, but this is not the case here. Unfortunately, the correct option here is alpha. All the other options are incorrect, although it may seem that 1338 to 1453 does not encompass 100 years. It contains more than 100 years, but this exactly is the date, 1338 to 1453. The next question says, in 1362 English was introduced into law courts. In what year it was used for the first time in the opening of Parliament as a result of such an act previous year? The year was 1363. Automatically all the other options are being rejected. Norman forced the population of Britain to abandon English and use, teach and learn French, but John Cornwall, a school teacher, and his followers had succeeded in reversing the trend by what year? Now here the option is 1385. All the other options are of course incorrect, and I have already mentioned that it was 14th century, but there was hardly any clue here because all these years fall in the 14th century. So 1385 was exactly the year. Geoffrey of Monmouth. Monmouth is an area in Britain. Created some lasting legends in his Historia Regum Britanniae. Which of them provided material for the first English tragedy composed in 1561 by Thomas Sackville and Thomas Norton? Now this is something that you must know because this is written almost in every book. First is very important. First novel, father of some genre, first tragedy, first comedy, first epic. These things are quite important. So as far as first tragedy is concerned, it was Gorboduc, and it was written by Thomas Sackville and Thomas Norton. And which year? In 1561. And this is something that is quite important in my lectures, that although there are 20 MCQs, there are only 20 multiple choice questions, and you might find that this material is not enough as far as 3 days preparation is concerned, because I usually upload it my lectures, every lecture, after 2 to 3 days. But you may notice that in every question you are going to find some information that could have been made into another MCQ, but I thought it appropriate to make it a single and multiple choice question and give you some information and ask for some information in that same question. So you have been told that the first tragedy was written by Thomas Sackville and Thomas Norton. They were two people, and it was written in 1561, and it was taken from Historia Regum Britannia. It was written by Geoffrey of Monmouth. Now 4 pieces of information are already there in the question, and 5th piece of information is being demanded from you. I have already told you the correct option, that was Goberdug. It is also called Forex and Porex. Goberdug was a British king, and all of them are kings. Alpha, Beta, Charlie and Delta, all of them were British kings in different era. These are stories of different kings. King Lear was a very famous tragedy by William Shakespeare, but in this question it is not the correct option. King Arthur, although he was a king, but it is not a title of any tragedy or any drama. Cymbeline, again, it was a title of very famous English play by William Shakespeare. Wace translated Geoffrey of Monmouth into Anglo-French in a work titled Roman de Brute, which was then translated in English in the early 13th century by whom? You have to name the writer, thus introducing Arthurian legends into vernacular. Vernacular means the local language that was used by common people in that era. Vernacular here means Middle English language. And Arthurian legends, the fantastical mythical stories that were associated to some King Arthur. King Arthur was a king who is known to have ruled somewhere in 5th to 6th century Anno Domini. It is not known whether he was a real king or he was just a part of stories. So you have to tell who was the writer who brought the stories of King Arthur from Anglo-French language to English language, Middle English language. Was it Boccaccio? No. He wrote Decameron, and that was inspiration for Geoffrey Chaucer for his Canterbury Tales. Richard Pankrich, actually he was the pupil of John Cornwall. You can go to question number 11 and see that there was a person, John Cornwall, who was a school teacher, and he succeeded in reversing the trend of making Middle English language the common language in England. Now Richard Pankrich was actually pupil or student of that John Cornwall. He has nothing to do with bringing that legends into English language. So Layman, of course, Layman was a person who brought that stories into English language. All the other options are incorrect. The next 4 lines are there in Middle English language, and if you have read prologue to the Canterbury Tales, you might be familiar with this sort of language structure and these sort of spellings. Now this is opening of some famous poem. You have to name that poem. These are the opening lines of a very famous Middle English poem written by an unknown author in last quarter of the 13th century. What is the title of that poem? Modus operandi, the first option. Actually, this cannot, maybe it can be the title of some poem, but it means the method of doing something. If you have some typical characteristic method of doing something, it means that that method is your modus operandi. Love Rune, although it is a poem, but here it is not a correct option too. And Cursor Mundi, definitely this is the option that should be chosen as correct option. All the other options are incorrect. Which of the following tendencies regnant in the Middle Ages? Regnant, what does it mean? It means something that was prevalent, something that was very commonly followed and believed in. And now the question is, regnant in the Middle Ages is highlighted by the poem mentioned in question number 14. What is the question number 14? We have there we got a poem, the name title of which was Cursor Monday. So you have to tell what were the tendency that were highlighted by that poem. Was it didactic, entertainment, romance, or recreation? This was actually a religious poem. It was highly unlikely for a religious poem to become entertainment or romance or recreation, whatever it is. So all these options are, of course, incorrect, and the one option that remains is didactic. Which of the following poems was written in octosyllabic? Octo means 8, and syllable we have already mentioned. It is one vowel sound that has some consonant cluster in the beginning or end, and those consonant clusters are of course optional. Couplet are two lines that rhyme with each other. It followed the French and Latin tradition of debate in the form of verse, a debate between a secular amorous character and a didactic monastic one. The poem was The Owl and the Nightingale. All the other options are incorrect, and there is hardly anything to discuss here. Which of the following poems marks the revival of Anglo-Saxon alliterative tradition in Middle English? Now, there was revival of the tradition that has once been lost under the influence of French language, but there was revival of it, and actually all these poems were the revival. So all of these is correct option, and all other options are incorrect. Homilies are quite common as far as Middle English literature is concerned. What kind of writings are they? Didactic and spiritual piece of writings in prose, didactic and spiritual pieces of writing in verse. Actually, both of them are correct, so the correct option is both alpha and beta. All the other options are of course incorrect. A contemplative piece of writing, no. None of these again, no. Second last question says, medieval romance can be categorized in three distinct fields as far as its subject matter is concerned. Matter of France, which dealt with the exploits of Charlemagne and his knights. Charlemagne was a king of France, and he is also known as Charles the First and Charles the Great. He was also first Holy Roman Emperor. Matter of Britain, dealing with the activities of Arthur and his knights. About Arthur we have already discussed that he was a legendary character. It is not known whether he did exist or not. Matter of Rome the Great, dealing with what? Now you have to tell what was exactly there in the subject matter of the matter of Rome. First option is medievalized ancient world far removed from the original sources. And Christianized pagan world. Pagan means heathen, that does not believe in any god. Biblical stories and stories of saints. The stories of Roman Republic where democracy held sway means it ruled there, it was quite common there, it was prevailing there. So the first option is of course correct, that says medievalized ancient world. Ancient world that was medievalized. It was medieval version of that. It was not exactly what happened in that. For example, it is said that the story of Troy that is basically present in the poems of epics of Homer, it was taken not from the poems of Homer but from some later poet who wrote the same material in Latin language. So it was quite unfortunate, and the same thing prevailed in the period of Renaissance, when the first tragedy and first comedy were affected and influenced by Latin writers more than Greek writers. The last question of this lecture says, the concept of courtly love, the love of a knight for a lady to whose service he dedicated himself selflessly, originated from three sources. Which of the following was not among those three? Social conditions in the Middle Ages. Yes, certainly it was there. So this cannot be the correct option, because we have to choose option that was not the influence, right? What were the social conditions? Social conditions were that there was one single lord, and all the other persons in that area were subservient to him, subordinate to him, and of course the ladies who were present in the house of that lord were quite admired, and to the extent of even worship. All the other persons loved them in their hearts, but they even did not have any even remote hope of marrying them. They only admired them in their poetry, in their words, and in their hearts. Interpretation of Latin love poets such as Ovid. This was also certainly a factor. So again, not the option here. Shift in the conception of a woman from Eve, the origin of all human woes, to Virgin Mary, the pattern of ideal manhood. It was, of course, the option. French poetry itself, which idolized women. This was not the option. So this was not the option. This is correct option for us. So this was the lecture again. Just like my previous lecture, I would also request you to subscribe my channel again. And secondly, if you have any question, you can come in comment section and ask the question, and you can even contact me on Facebook. If there is any suggestion, I will welcome it and follow it in my upcoming lectures. Till the next lecture, goodbye, take care.